walking virtually along the world's most revered footpaths and connecting the global community of pilgrims. It's the Sacred Steps Podcast. Available on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Broadcasting from the Shea Mare Studios in Florida. Here's your host, Pilgrim backpacker and author, Kevin Donahue.
Buen Camino, Pilgrims, and welcome back to the Sacred Steps Podcast. I'm Kevin Donahue, Pilgrim, backpacker, and author of Sacred Steps, a pilgrimage journal. On today's episode, we're walking virtually alongside English pilgrim and author Carolyn Gillespie. This was a very, very special interview for me because the focus of Carolyn's book, Pilgrim, which is available now as both a paperback on Amazon and also as an ebook on Kindle, the focus of her book is the transformation that parents face as their children grow up and begin their own lives outside the home. In our house, Jack just turned 13, and the sands are really starting to go through the hourglass. So I empathize with Carolyn and empty nest parents. In the interview, we both get a little misty-eyed, and it made for some awkward pauses, I think, but just a heartfelt and very honest conversation about her journey and her new book, Pilgrim. Before we begin, I want to say a very warm welcome to one of our new VIP members, Michelle from New York State. Michelle is making plans for her first Camino, the Camino Portuguese, next year. I just recorded a personal video welcome message for Michelle, and to our VIP members, I'll be spending time with each of you in a one-on-one video call to help plan your Camino. Everything from what to pack, to how to get from your doorstep to Spain and begin the Camino. Most of these video calls are about an hour and a half, but just a way to thank you for supporting the podcast. If you want to become a patron for the show, just visit sacredstepspodcast.com. Our membership is linked there on the homepage. Our website is also the place to record your voicemails for the podcast. Let us know where you're walking, and we may play your voicemail on an upcoming podcast. So I mentioned on our last podcast that I'll be resuming my Via Francigena pilgrimage in May, walking to Rome. And with all that is going on in the world, the global pandemic, the terrible tragedy unfolding in Ukraine, I know this is a very difficult day we're facing. If there is an opportunity, if you have something on your mind or something on your heart, I would be so grateful if you would allow me to carry your prayers in my backpack to Rome. To do so, just go to the website, click contact, and send your prayer request. In churches large and small, when I stop to rest or when I see something beautiful, I'll whisper your prayers. When I arrive at St. Peter's, I will light a candle on your behalf and lift you up in prayer. Many of you took time and entrusted me with your prayers on my last pilgrimage, and I was so humbled and moved for the opportunity to speak your prayers in Canterbury. If there is something I can shoulder for you, please send your prayer request on the website, sacredstepspodcast.com, before I depart in May. I am so honored and grateful for the opportunity to shoulder your prayers to Rome. Lastly, just thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I love connecting with so many of you through email and social media, little messages back and forth. I'm so grateful to share this podcast with you and your friends that might be considering their own pilgrimages. If you have a moment, it's a great help if you would just give the podcast a rating or write a review on your podcast app. We've gotten reviews and ratings on all the major apps worldwide, and frankly, it just means the world to have your rating so that other pilgrims can find the show. And if you haven't done so already, please click subscribe on your podcast app so that our next episodes will be available to you automatically. Okay, so let's get to today's episode with Carolyn Gillespie, author of Pilgrim, out now on Amazon. As I said, Carolyn's story hits very close to home for me as a parent. After years of raising 3 children, balancing family and work, and candidly, putting everyone else's needs ahead of her own, Carolyn found herself facing the reality of an empty nest. With her children grown and beginning lives of their own, her place in their lives and in her own world was suddenly and permanently changed. Unsure of what her personal identity would become without her children at home, Carolyn set out on the Camino de Santiago in search of herself. Through steps and miles, laughter and tears, she found her future self, and she shares the emotional transformation with all of us in her first book, Pilgrim. I feel as if our conversation was so impactful for me personally. I hope it is for you. So it's my pleasure to welcome Carolyn to the Sacred Steps podcast. Carolyn Gillespie, welcome to the Sacred Steps podcast.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. It's lovely to be with you on what is a rather gloomy afternoon in Surrey in England.
Well, good company makes for bright days, right? So I'm sorry we couldn't get good company. You're stuck with me, but we do have a great audience that's excited to hear about your book Pilgrim, which is available on Amazon and is linked below in our show notes. When I first heard your story, actually I think maybe it was on Facebook in the Camino authors group, because your book has come out recently, right? This is a new release.
Yes, it came out sort of second week in December, so it's just about had its third month birthday.
Very happy birthday, book. So the book is Pilgrim, and I mean, obviously the title drew me in right away because I was like, oh, okay, here's a book about pilgrim and pilgrimage, but it's not really a story that mirrors everyone's Camino experience. I want to ask you before we get into the book, how did you come to know about the Camino de Santiago?
Well, I think probably when I was at university, and I won't give away my age, but that was some time ago. I had a couple of friends. Actually, both of them have ended up being godparents to our children, to separate children. And those two friends spent a summer in university with no money, tracing the Napoleonic War, the Napoleonic battlefields across from France across the top of Spain. So they were doing it as a kind of history trip, but they found themselves inadvertently really on the Camino trail. And this was more than 30 years ago. So it wasn't a well-trodden path really in those days. And when they came back, they told us a little bit about it, and they'd had a real adventure and they'd met some really interesting, quirky people. And that was really, really fun. So that was the first time I had a little seed was planted somewhere in my head or in my heart. And then many years later, my sister and I went to Madrid to see her daughter who was living there. And it was the weekend, I don't know if you remember this, but when there was a volcano erupted and all travel in Europe
everything was shut down. Yes.
Yeah.
Boy, that was a precursor to shutting down travel in 2020, 2021.
It really was.
So you were in Madrid when that was happening.
We were in Madrid, yeah, and we were then stuck. And I had to get back for work. I was teaching full time at the time. And my sister's almost 20 years older than me. She and I had to make our way back to Edinburgh, so quite far north. It was a real adventure. And she said, wow, it's like a gap year in a weekend. We were on trains and boats and we met fascinating people. And one of the people we met on that trip back to Edinburgh was a woman who had just finished the Camino. And she was kind of alive with it. Her eyes were sparkling and she looked like something magical had happened to her. And listening to her talk about it made me think, I remember a little bit about that. And that little seed was sort of planted, was sort of watered, and it grew and grew. And I was in a very, very challenging, very full-time job. Mm-hmm. And I kept thinking about the Camino, and the Camino seemed like what I needed to do. That was my answer to what I needed to do next to kind of bridge the transition from one stage of my life into the next.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story, because you said you were an educator, yes, and a mother and wife, and then eventually you're going on the Camino. What transpired there?
Yeah. So I think I was working in a boarding school. It's a particularly sort of British thing, a boarding school, and it might be difficult for people who are not part of that tradition to understand. But it's it's way more than a full-time job. So I was running a boarding house with 65 girls in it. I'm an English teacher, but as well as teaching, I was the sort of pastoral carer for those girls. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I was working. Obviously, I slept, but if something happened in the night or any time of the day, I was pretty much on call. And it's an intense environment because girls from age 12 to 18 have lots of issues going on, and it was a wonderful job, but it was a really challenging job. I had some superb colleagues and some incredible girls that I was privileged to work with. But I worked all the time, and at that stage, my twins, who are my youngest, I had a son who was at university in St Andrews, and I had twins who were still at home, living at home with me, they were pupils in the school that I was teaching in. So while they were there was a reason for me to stop and eat a meal with them in an evening. But they had just come to the end of their time at school, and they were just about to leave to go off to their own gap years before university. And I suppose it was a bit of a crisis, thinking they're about to go and fly the nest, and and what happens to me when I'm not? I obviously would still be their mum, but when I'm no longer defined by that role, I'd just be, in my view, defined by my work. And I felt there was more than that. So while I was struggling with these ideas, the Camino grew started to really call to me. And so I think my colleagues thought I had completely lost my mind when I said that I was going to give up work. And the only thing I knew I wanted to do was to walk the Camino. I didn't have another plan, which seemed a bit reckless, but actually it was the best decision I think I ever made.
So at really this transitional period in your life,
yes,
the girls are gone. And leaving, and you decide you left a job you loved to really go about this journey, to decide who, at this point in our lives, we kind of decide who we're going to be next.
Yeah. I think I say in the book that I think I thought I was going to take the time on the journey to really think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. What could I do to be, productive? What did I really want to spend my time doing in the last section? And that sort of, once the children had gone, what was I going to do next? And I think it really became clear to me as I walked that it wasn't really about doing at all. It was much more about being.
Yeah.
And that was a really kind of profound realization on the walk. I think, as happens to many people, you realize that you're asking yourself the wrong questions.
Well, and the Camino creates this great headspace for us to evaluate many things that are on our mind and on our hearts, and clearly that was the case for you. So you set off for the Camino, but you didn't go alone, right?
No,
you went with one of your girlfriends.
Yeah, I had a plan to do it alone, and there were some funny moments where the girls in the boarding house where I was working, they actually sort of staged an intervention at one stage, and they sat me down and they said, "Mrs. Gillespie, we really feel we need to talk to you about this plan. And, you may not have thought it through, but it could be quite dangerous, and perhaps you will contract cholera." They said, "There might be snakes." They really felt I was poorly equipped for the journey, but at that stage, I was planning to walk alone. But when I began training, I began to walk with a friend to try and get a bit fit. And she then said, "Oh, I'll come for a week with you." And then she said, "Oh, maybe I'll come for 2 weeks." And then by Christmas, she said, "I'm just going to come the whole way," which was fantastic.
A lot of our listeners are very familiar with the Camino. So I think just as a baseline, let me just ask. So where did you begin your Camino pilgrimage walk?
We began in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. So we flew to Biarritz, I think, and started there.
So you get ready to start the Camino Français, and you're in Saint-Jean-de-Pied-de-Port. That first night when you arrive in Saint-Jean and you and Ali are there, take us back. What was, the next day you're going to start the Camino? What is on your mind right before you're about to start this epic new journey in your life?
Well, the first week we were joined by a friend of mine from school who was the head of modern languages and a fluent Spanish speaker. And we stayed the first night in Saint Jean at her friend's. She has a friend who lives there, and we stayed at her friend's house, who could not have been more hospitable or more welcoming. But that first night, we heard when we went to the Pilgrim office that there was snow on the mountains, and we weren't going to be able to take the Napoleon route that we had really hoped. We'd been training for it, and we really had steeled ourselves for it, and we were really looking forward to it. And we were really disappointed then when we heard that we wouldn't be able to take that route. And it was a bit of a dilemma, because the friend was saying, why don't you stay with us for a couple of days and maybe the route will clear. And it was very heavy rain forecast for the next day. So we had a little bit of a dilemma that night, and we decided we would just go for it, that we could have waited weeks for the weather to clear, and we didn't have that much time. So we were kind of nervous and a little bit disappointed, because our expectation, we'd spent ages looking at that profile of the mountain and thinking, wow, that's steep, and climbing up big hills to get ready for it. It was still pretty steep the other way, I have to say. So by the time we started to walk, we realized it was still going to be a challenge, even though we weren't going up via Horizon. So that was a little bit tense. And the other thing I would say we weren't really prepared for was being recognized as pilgrims. I think we had thought it was a pretty individual thing we were doing. And at the airport, somebody saw our shell and asked us if we were pilgrims, and they said they were pilgrims too. And I hadn't really given very much thought to the communal aspect of the journey. And I was a bit uncomfortable about that, I have to say. I didn't being sort of drawn in at none of the three of us are really what you would describe as sort of team sort of people. We're all sort of individuals and don't really like being part of a group. And so that really worried me. I thought, oh my goodness, Ali said to me, oh gosh, are we all going to have to sing together before the night is out? And this incredible transformation happened during the walk. The things that we felt were a bit cringy at the beginning, that would be quite difficult, became part of what was wonderful about it, of being part of a group and part of a family of pilgrims. Was something I will absolutely treasure. But at the beginning, I felt a little bit ambiguous about that.
Our guest today on the Sacred Steps podcast is Carolyn Gillespie, and her book, Pilgrim, is available on Amazon.com or Amazon in your local country. We'll link it below in the show notes. In just a moment, we're going to find out more about Carolyn's walk on the Camino de Santiago.
Are you planning a walking pilgrimage? Share the details of your journey as a voice message with our podcast audience. Visit sacredstepspodcast.com to record your voice message for a future broadcast. Know someone considering pilgrimage? Share this episode as a text from your device and help others find the podcast by leaving a star rating on your podcast app. And now, the Sacred Steps podcast continues.
Carolyn, I want to ask you, as you're sort of beginning, you said you trained. What's that first week or so like as you go, as you begin the Camino Frances? The physicality of it. How are you doing walking the Camino?
The first day, when we were climbing up those big hills, we felt so proud of ourselves, because there was a big group of teenagers who had started the same day as us in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and who kind of followed us, or we alongside them all the way. And the first day, I remember climbing up the hill, and they had stopped for a rest and they looked really tired. And we were so proud of ourselves that we got up that hill quicker than them. And we felt good. We felt like our training had gone well and that we were strong. By day 3, we were in agony. I felt like the Little Mermaid when she first learns to walk. Every step is agony. And in the morning, sort of oiling yourself until you were ready to move was really hard. It was tougher than we anticipated, for sure. Just not so much that any one day was a challenge to get to the end. It's the repetitive nature of it, of not allowing your muscles time to recover before you're going off again. And that was a surprise how hard that was.
Yeah, reading your book, you kind of get the impression that, you know, the first bit of the journey is just a dose of reality of what it's like to be making that pilgrimage. And, you know, you look on social media and on Facebook, and it's sunshine and rainbows and people, you know, hugging and those things. And I think the reality of, goodness, this is a real physical expenditure and a real physical and visceral experience. One of the things I always appreciated when I was walking was when the body gets tired, it quiets the mind. And, you know, you just end up in these spaces where you can think and reflect. As you're beginning to think and reflect on your journey, when do you kind of go through this process where you say, I know who I am and I know who I've been, but who will I become?
I think it happens so gradually, almost imperceptibly, that it's difficult to pinpoint a specific moment when that happens. I found as part of my walk, and I agree with you, that walking on your own, having distance between you and the other people who are really important to you as part of the experience, it's important to also have time just with yourself in that meditative space where you really sort of transcend the body, you transcend the pain in your body to access something that I hadn't experienced in my ordinary everyday life. As I was walking, I think that I imagined that my intention for the pilgrimage was about letting go. It was about letting go of my children who were about to leave home and letting them move on to the next part of their own journeys with love. I imagined that, and I let go became a kind of mantra as I walked. And when I stopping in churches at the end of the day became really important to me, because my experience was different from the people I was walking with in that respect. I wanted to spend time in prayer, and when almost everywhere that is the end of the road for that night, there is a quiet church that you can sit in, and it became a sort of it became about that release at the end of the day where I finally sat down and took my pack off. Sometimes I didn't take my pack off because it was too hard. I just sat down.
Too hard to get it back on.
Yeah. But the quiet and the peace and the stillness in those churches at the end of the day became a really important milestone to me, of that feeling like I'd reached that part of the destination and having that sort of quiet moment of prayer. And I think that probably, I don't know, a week or 2 weeks in, I began to think about really what the difference between a long walk and a pilgrimage really is, what my intention was, and what I don't know if it was as conscious as thinking about what do I want to gain from this experience, but it was definitely about a letting go. That was clear, and it became clear to me as I walked that I wasn't just letting go of the children. There was all kinds of baggage, and those Camino puns are not, they're there for a reason. I think we do shed things as we go, and let go of guilt and shame and all kinds of things that no longer serve us as we walk. There's a sort of lightening in many ways as we walk, and all of that was barely perceptible, but pretty profound by the end. All those tiny moments had added up into something pretty huge.
Just hearing you talk about, the people that you've spent all of their lives with, your daughters, and then so much of the lives of the girls at the school that you had seen, transform, and now leaving and stopping in the churches every night and thinking a little bit about, your, the purpose of your Camino, it almost sounds as if, and I apologize if this is a bad metaphor, but it almost sounds like a grieving process where there was maybe a loss, and then a new tomorrow, if you will.
I think so. I think it is a bit like that you sort of let go of. It's like shedding skins, isn't it? Or the sort of image of those Russian dolls, that it's the opposite. It's you're taking off old layers to get to the little doll in the middle. That's the real essence of you. And so shedding old roles. You don't parent a baby in the same way as you parent a teenager. And now that my children I have 2 boys and a girl, and they're all in their 20s now, and that feels like a whole different way that you have to parent. I have to be a parent, and it's no less challenging. It's no less wonderful. It's just different. We're not one in one fixed place ever, and that sort of evolution of sort of shedding old roles on the Camino becomes really focused. You can understand those sort of transitional stages, or experience that sort of. I was in a transitional stage. Not everybody might be when they're walking, but for me, being on the Camino during that transition felt like a really valuable thing to do, to be sort of walking through something into the next stage of my life.
I have to say, when I was reading your book, my son is just a preteen. He's turning 13 this year, and reading your book and thinking about how our lives unfold, and the moments that we spend in one stage of our lives or another stage of our lives. Just share with you, I was talking to my wife, I guess it was a few months ago after starting to read your book, and my son and I have decided that we're going to walk the Camino together next year, as I turn 50, as sort of this unifying point at which he's becoming more of a man and starting to move towards his next stage. And I'm seeing through your book and the lens that our days together, will be fewer and fewer. And so your book is really profound, I think, for parents who have spent much of their lives, devoted to the day-to-day care that's required in a family. And then you reach this point in your life where those people aren't maybe there every day.
Yes.
And you wonder, like what does that mean for me? What's my purpose? What's my role?
I think we kind of approach that with a sense of sort of, you feel a bit guilty about doing anything for yourself, having spent so long putting other people first in the family. You're always last on a long list of, after the dog in my family. But suddenly to give yourself permission to actually think about your own needs and what you want is it takes a bit of courage, really, because it's not what we're sort of have been trained to do. It felt a bit unnatural and a bit selfish, and I was a bit uncomfortable with it, I suppose. And yet I think it was absolutely right for me to really take stock and think about what next.
You raise a great point, because we've actually talked about that a lot in my family, because I've been doing these different pilgrimage walks, and they take time away, and in my job I only get so much vacation, right, and so much time that I can take away from work. And for you, it's probably even more complicated, because, as you said, it's 24 hours a day in your previous role. And you think about, how do I divide up that time? And I want to spend as much time with my family as I possibly can, and traveling, or just being together, playing a game, reading a book. And then to think that you might go away by yourself to do, a pilgrimage where they're not with you. It does feel a bit selfish. And I've really struggled with that. I think it's something that as a parent, when we say, where is the space for my identity separate from my role?
Yeah,
that's really hard.
it is. It's really hard. But I think if you think of it in terms of what you're putting into yourself, what that little short burst of time that you could invest in yourself fills you up, doesn't it? It fills up your cup that might
Absolutely.
be completely depleted, and feeling like you're worthy of that is a good thing.
It is indeed. Now, let's be honest. The Camino is not all introspection and reflection. There's a bit of fun to be had at times if you choose to, and you met some people along the way who added color to your story.
Yeah, we met the most incredible people along the way. I'm sure everybody thinks that their Camino family is the best, but ours really were the best. So we had people who just kept us laughing, and when you felt a little bit like it was too big a task, or too big a mountain still to climb, there were inspirational people round every corner. Every time you felt a little bit proud of yourself and you thought, wow, look what I've done, you'd run into somebody who had done something really truly remarkable to sort of humble you. But we had some extraordinary people that were brave and courageous and seemed to be overcoming huge obstacles to walk their Camino their way. Those people just, when you meet them, you think you might have lost them, and then you meet them at an albergue up on the road ahead. Or for us, we bumped into numerous people that we'd met in Santiago, which also felt wonderful, to be reunited with those people. But we met people from all around the world, and they really kept us going.
Yeah, you said your Pilgrim family, and I think that's such an apt expression, because when I think of my Camino family, I fond memories, and we would walk together. Sometimes we would separate, we'd come back together. We would say, I'll meet you in Santiago de Compostela, and just such a rich part of the experience. But you said that wasn't your to borrow an expression, that wasn't really your cup of tea. You're more of an introvert.
Yeah. I really didn't think on that first night in Roncesvalles. They sit you at a table of 12 people, and we were like, no, we'll just have a table for 3. And they were like, oh no, there are no tables for 3. You have to join all these people. And we were, oh, well, we'll just go and eat, and then we'll just get out quickly. And everybody introduced themselves, and there was people from, there were maybe 5 different languages spoken at the table that we were sitting at dinner. And we said to each other afterwards, is it going to be like this every night? We're going to have to speak to people every day. I think the second or the third night we were at a similar situation where we were at a table with lots of other pilgrims, and then there was a kind of softening by then. We were like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be so bad. And then I don't know how to identify the point at which that shifted, but from certainly the end of the first week, we were just felt so much part of a community that we hadn't expected to be part of at all.
We're discussing Carolyn's book, Pilgrim, which is available from Amazon in your home country. It's really a transformational story of a working professional and mother who finds herself as an empty nester and pursues greater understanding and self-reflection on the Camino de Santiago. Really appreciate you being here with us today, Carolyn. Within the book, there's some oddities that happen as well. So, anytime you're walking across the entirety of a country, you notice things. Some of them seem random. Some of them seem like, what is going on here? There was a bird that kind of pursued all of you. And yeah. I don't understand it, but it sounds like such a random thing that maybe had a bit of meaning. Yeah, a cuckoo bird.
There was a cuckoo that followed us all the way into the last week. We heard him every single day. I'm sure it was a different cuckoo, but to us it felt like the same cuckoo was following us all the way. And one day we met this in Roncesvalles. We met this lovely woman called Mary who was walking with her daughter Merit, and I don't know, half the way into the walk we'd run into them, and I said, "Oh, it's my cuckoo," and she said, "It's not your cuckoo, that's my cuckoo. He's been following me all the way from Roncesvalles." But he was there all the way until that last bit of this, when you walk through the eucalyptus trees for about the 3 days in Galicia on the way into Santiago. He wasn't there anymore, so he must have felt he didn't need to be there with us any longer.
We're given the strangest guardian angels in life, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Let's talk a little bit about Santiago de Compostela, because as a first Camino experience, you've been walking for 7 weeks and weeks, 7 weeks, and you arrive in Santiago de Compostela, and you're walking up. What was the arrival experience at the Cathedral de Santiago like for you?
That final day, there was a crowd of us. So we, Ali and I, made friends with a wonderful woman called Jean from Boston, who joined us for the last 3 weeks of the walk. And we were with Jean, and my husband and daughter were also with us for the last week of the walk. And when we reached, I've forgotten, is it Monte de Gozo? Is that the name of the mountain just before you arrive? And we sort of stopped there for a drink and sort of looked down, expecting to see Santiago, and it was a cloudy day. It wasn't a beautiful day, and I didn't feel very much. I thought, oh, this feels a bit disappointing. I was expecting to feel really overwhelmed, and I kind of walked on my own then. I came down the hill and walked on my own into the town. And then as we reached the town, it felt like we were probably 1.5 miles out of town. We stopped again to have a drink, go have a loo stop. And it felt impossible. It just felt impossible. I thought, I'm not going to make it. And just suddenly I felt absolutely exhausted. I've got a picture of my daughter kind of lying on the street, like she just thought, I can't do it. It's just too much. And everything hurt. Every single bit of me hurt like it hadn't hurt for a couple of weeks. I thought, I'm not going to manage. It's too much. And we kind of steeled ourselves to get up off the floor and make it for that last 1.5 miles with kind of, I think my heart felt heavy at that point. And David and Connie, David was really keen that although he just sort of stepped in for the glory bit of the last 5 days from Syria, he wanted the sort of arrival in Santiago to be the experience of, he didn't want to encroach on that experience. So he and Connie kind of pulled back a little bit and let Ali and Jean and I walk on our own. And as we sort of went into the streets, Jean and I, then the streets are narrow, and Jean and I were ahead and Ali was just behind us. And I was thinking, we're never going to get there. I'm not going to make it. And then Ali poked her head through between us and said, "It's there, look."
That's really special.
It's just the most wonderful feeling when you arrive.
Yeah, I remember talking about with one of our guests on the podcast about arriving in Santiago de Compostela, and my experience was very similar to yours. I was physically broken. I was not doing well on that last day, making it in, between bruises and just the physicality of the Camino walk. And I was, very emotionally laid bare from just the experience. And my family was there waiting for me in Santiago de Compostela, and just to fall into their arms was a really emotional experience for me as well. And I can just imagine you and Ali making it there, and then, the family being there as well. It must have just been a great sense of accomplishment for you. Yeah. And talking about this being something that was so, that feels or looks or seems a little bit selfish, but this was like the turning of a page to have to have done this entire Camino, kind of on your own.
It was, and the backdrop to me walking was that my mother back home was very ill and had mouth cancer for 5 years before I walked, and what we were talking a little bit about filling up that cup, and the walk filled up my cup for the kind of months that were to come. So we arrived back in May, and she died at the end of August.
God bless.
So it was a kind of tough road as soon as I came back, and I felt filled up, ready for that next part of my journey.
I have to ask, because we talk about this sometimes. This was such a transformational journey for you. We see in social media and in shared experiences, we see people talking about going back to the Camino or walking other walks. Is that something that calls to you? Renewed journeys? Yes,
we're going back in September. So we're doing the Portuguese way in September.
Oh, and wonderful.
We've been planning that for Ali and I and Tinker and Lynn, who also joined us for a section in the middle, are going from Porto in September. So it has been really a lot of fun planning that this time. What about you? Are you going back anytime soon?
So I did the Camino Portuguese last in 2019, and it's a wonderful walk. I think it's a bit my favorite. So next year, Jack and I'm not sure which route we'll walk. We might actually do the Inglés, which would be a wonderful Camino. Later this spring, I'll be continuing my walk on the Via Francigena. So I walked in England, and now I'm going to be over in Italy, and going to do a couple weeks there to finish in Rome. And the family has decided they're going to meet me in Rome.
Oh, wow.
Which will be wonderful.
That
just
will be
absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to be back walking another pilgrimage. It's been so challenging these last few years, but also to have my family there, because I walked twice last year in 2021. I walked in California along the California Missions Trail, and also in England. I walked from London to Canterbury to Dover, and then up north I walked the Way of St. Cuthbert to Holy Island, Lindisfarne.
Oh yes, that's near my part of the world.
Yes. And my family wasn't there, which was special too, in a different way, to finish a walk and be, to have it all to yourself. I mean, again, we talked about being selfish, but as individuals, we're people in addition to our roles as parents. And, but I can't wait to see them in Rome and to finish at St. Peter's. Yeah.
We did the same group that we, the four girls who we call ourselves the Sturdy Girls. We did
Love that.
The Sturdy Girls did the Pilgrim's Way in England from Winchester to Canterbury. So we walked a little bit of the way that you will have walked.
Yes. So our routes would have crossed. I wanted to go to. It was very important to me to go to Rochester Cathedral in Kent, and so I wanted to walk from London because a good friend of mine, author Andy Bull, is in London, and one of the traditional routes of the Pilgrim's Way would have been to start at the St. Thomas Chapel on the old London Bridge that runs through, had run next to St. Magnus the Martyr in London, and now the traditional route is to start at Southwark. So I started at Southwark, received a pilgrim's blessing, and then walked towards Rochester. And the Rochester Cathedral is home to the patron saint of adopted children, and so that was very important for me to go to Rochester. And so then from Rochester, I made my way towards the North Downs, and then we would have joined up at that point along the North Downs Way.
I live on the North Downs Way.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. So, Carolyn, Pilgrim is available now. You can get it on Kindle. You can order paperback or whatever you're looking for on Amazon. I know you've got a new project related to the book. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on next with Pilgrim?
Yes. Yes, it's a bit nerve-wracking. But there has been some demand for an Audible. I think a lot of people like to listen to stories, and there isn't an Audible at the moment. So I've been persuaded to have a go at doing the Audible. So I think I start recording that in April, and hopefully by the summer it will be available on Audible.
And then once it's available, you're off to the Camino Portuguese. So
yes, absolutely.
That's going to be a fantastic summer. So if you're interested in downloading a copy of the book, you can get it now on Kindle, and then soon on Amazon, it'd be an Audible ebook as well. So you can listen to Carolyn explain the story, reading it back. And so as you're reading the book, it's quite emotional in some parts. I guess you have to steel yourself for reading back your own story.
I think so. I once had to read, when I was teaching, the scene from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe when Aslan dies. It's the saddest bit in any book I've ever read. I had to practice it. I cried every single time for about 20 times, and then I didn't cry anymore. I reached a place where I got beyond that. So I think for the emotional bits, I'll just do the same. I'll just practice them until I don't well up anymore, till it feels like something that's not so much in my heart.
I think that's great. It's who we are as people, and your experience, I think, resonates with so many who find themselves in the same situation. And so I thank you for pouring out your heart and sharing a bit of the process in Pilgrim with all of us, because your experience, I think, makes all of us a bit more profound about what comes next in our next chapter. So thank you for sharing that.
It's good. It's really good what comes next. I'm really, really very excited about this next stage of my life and everything that it's got to offer. It's just, I think I was scared it wouldn't be quite so full of, love and family. I liked having them all near me, but it's just as good when they move on.
That's wonderful. Carolyn, thank you for being with us on the podcast today. It's been a real pleasure to meet you. For those that are interested in the book Pilgrim, we'll link it below in the show notes. You'll be able to access it on Amazon, either as a Kindle or paperback, and also Carolyn's website, where you can find out more information about the upcoming Audible book. Carolyn, thank you so much for being with us today. Buen Camino, my friend.
And you, Kevin, thank you much. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.
This has been the Sacred Steps Podcast. To help other pilgrims find the show, please leave a star rating on your podcast app. For episode notes, links from the show, or to contact Kevin, visit our website at sacredstepspodcast.com. You can also join our Behind the Mic email list on the website. Before you go, tap subscribe so our future episodes are available to you automatically.